The bitter January wind rattled the windows of Olivia Blackburn's fine two-story home in Nebraska City, Nebraska Territory, 1857, but the cold outside couldn't match the chill that had settled in her heart. At 22, she stood before the bedroom mirror, fastening pearl buttons at her throat, wondering how she'd become a stranger to herself in just 3 years of marriage to Harold Blackburn, the wealthiest banker in the county and 20 years her senior. "The Henderson dinner begins at 7 sharp," Harold announced from the doorway, his voice clipped with the same efficiency he used when discussing financial ledgers. "I expect you'll wear the blue gown." The mayor's wife commented on how becoming it was at the last gathering. Olivia nodded, fingers trembling slightly as she reached for her hairbrush. "Yes, Harold, and do try to engage in conversation this time. Your silence reflects poorly on our standing." She met his eyes in the mirror cold, assessing, like he was evaluating a property investment rather than addressing his wife. "I'll do my best." When he left, Olivia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She gazed at her reflection, the honey blonde hair neatly pinned, the emerald eyes that had lost their sparkle, the fine clothes that were chosen for her. Everything about her existence was decided by Harold, from the food served at their table to the people deemed acceptable for her acquaintance. Marriage had been her father's solution after his failing general store threatened to leave them destitute. Harold Blackburn, with his bank and properties throughout the territory, had seemed an answer to prayer. Her parents had been so relieved when he'd shown interest in their daughter that they'd overlooked the obvious that Harold wanted not a wife but an ornament, a testament to his success. The Nebraska City winters were long, but the days in this gilded cage were longer. Later that evening, Olivia sat stiffly beside her husband at the Henderson home, the conversation flowing around her like water around a stone. She smiled and nodded appropriately, having learned the art of appearing engaged while her mind wandered. Tonight, it drifted to the book she'd hidden beneath her mattress, adventure tales of the western frontier. Harold disapproved of such frivolous reading, claiming it filled women's heads with dangerous ideas. "I understand you're expanding operations westward, Blackburn," Mayor Henderson said, cutting into a slice of roast. Harold nodded, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "Indeed. The land beyond Fort Kearney holds tremendous opportunity for those willing to invest. I'm sending a representative to establish banking relations with the settlements springing up along the trail." "Dangerous country," someone commented. "Indians, outlaws, the elements themselves, progress waits for no man," Harold interrupted. "Where there's risk, there's profit to be made." Olivia's attention sharpened. "Will you be traveling west yourself?" she asked, the first words she'd volunteered all evening. Harold's expression tightened with disapproval at her interruption. "Certainly not. A man in my position delegates such matters." "Of course," she murmured, eyes downcast, feeling the weight of his displeasure like a physical thing. As the evening wore on, Olivia excused herself to the powder room, needing a moment's respite from the suffocating conversation. In the hallway, she paused by an open window, drawing in deep breaths of the crisp night air. The sound of horses approaching drew her attention to the street below. A small group of riders moved through the moonlight. Trail dust clung to their clothing, marking them as travelers rather than locals. Leading them was a man whose straight-backed posture and easy command of his mount caught her eye. Unlike Harold's polished appearance, everything about this stranger spoke of practicality and life lived under open skies. As if sensing her gaze, the rider looked up. Though distance and shadows obscured his features, something in that brief connection sent an unfamiliar thrill through Olivia's body. Then he tipped his hat, a small, respectful gesture, and continued on with his companions. "Mrs. Blackburn." The hostess's voice startled her. "Is everything all right?" Olivia turned, composing herself. "Yes, just getting some air. The room was rather warm." "Well, do come back in. Your husband is preparing to leave." The ride home was silent, Harold's displeasure a tangible presence in the carriage. "You embarrassed me tonight," he finally said as their driver guided the horses through Nebraska City's quiet streets. "I'm sorry," Olivia replied automatically. "I didn't realize asking about your business was inappropriate." "My business decisions are not matters for your concern or public discussion." His voice was cold. "Remember your place, Olivia. I didn't marry you for your opinions on banking ventures." "No," Olivia thought bitterly. "You married me because my father owed you money and I was pretty enough to serve as your living trophy." The next morning, Olivia ventured into town on the pretext of selecting fabrics for new curtains. Harold preferred she remain at home with her needlework and household management, but even he recognized the occasional necessity of her appearing in public to maintain the image of a contented marriage. Nebraska City was growing rapidly. The constant flow of pioneers heading west along the Missouri River bringing prosperity and change. Olivia moved between the mercantile stores with practiced efficiency, exchanging pleasantries with shopkeepers who treated her with the deference due Harold Blackburn's wife. At Jensen's General Store, she was examining bolts of fabric when the bell above the door jangled. The man who entered brought with him the scent of leather, horses, and open prairie. Tall and broad-shouldered, he removed his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by outdoor living. Olivia recognized him immediately as the rider she'd glimpsed from the Hendersons' window. "Morning, madam," he nodded politely before turning to the shopkeeper. "Got a telegram saying my supplies were ready for pickup." "Indeed they are, Mr. Garrett. Just finished putting the order together yesterday." The shopkeeper disappeared into the back room. Olivia pretended interest in a bolt of calico, but found herself stealing glances at the stranger. Unlike the men at Harold's gatherings, there was nothing affected about him. He stood with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, examining the store's offerings with practical interest. He caught her looking and smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "New in town?" he asked. The direct question startled her. In her social circle, conversation followed rigid patterns of formality. "No," she answered. "I've lived in Nebraska City for 3 years." "Then I'm the newcomer," he replied. "First time in these parts, name's Patrick Garrett." "Olivia Blackburn," she replied, then hesitated, unsure of protocol for such a casual introduction. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Blackburn." "As in Harold Blackburn the banker, my husband," she confirmed, her voice dropping slightly. Something in her tone must have communicated what she didn't say, because his expression shifted subtly. Before he could respond, the shopkeeper returned with a large bundle. "Here's everything on your list, Mr. Garrett. Will you be needing help getting this to your camp?" "I can manage," Patrick said, hoisting the supplies with ease. He turned back to Olivia. "Nice meeting you, Mrs. Blackburn." "Likewise, Mr. Garrett." She watched as he settled his hat back on his head and made his way out. "That's the scout Harold hired," the shopkeeper offered, misreading her interest as confusion. "Heading west to Fort Laramie and beyond. Your husband's got big plans for banking out that way." "Yes," Olivia murmured. "He mentioned something about that." Over the following days, Olivia found her thoughts returning to the brief encounter. There had been something in Patrick Garrett's direct gaze that made her feel truly seen for the first time in years. It was foolish, she knew, to dwell on a momentary exchange with a passing stranger, yet she couldn't help herself. One afternoon, while Harold was occupied at the bank, Olivia decided to visit her friend Alina at the millinery shop. The spring mud made walking difficult, and she was carefully navigating a particularly treacherous stretch of road when a wagon came barreling around the corner. The driver, seeing her too late, pulled hard on the reins, causing the horses to rear and the wagon to slide sideways in the mud. Olivia froze in panic as the heavy wagon careened toward her. Suddenly, strong arms wrapped around her waist, yanking her backwards just as the wagon slid past, splashing mud where she'd been standing seconds before. "Are you all right?" Her rescuer's voice was familiar. She looked up into Patrick Garrett's concerned face, his hand still steadying her shoulders. "Yes," she gasped, heart pounding from the near miss. "Thank you." "Damnation," the wagon driver called out, struggling to control his team. "Beg pardon, madam, horses got spooked by that loose dog." Patrick helped Olivia to more solid ground. "You might want to take that corner slower next time," he called to the driver, who nodded sheepishly before continuing on. Olivia became acutely aware that they were standing in the middle of the street, his hands still on her arms, and people were beginning to stare. In a town like Nebraska City, such a scene would inevitably reach Harold's ears. "I should go," she said, stepping back reluctantly. "Wait." Patrick reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. "You've got mud." He gestured toward her cheek. Olivia took the offered cloth, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett." "Patrick," he corrected with a smile that transformed his serious face. "I can't," she stopped herself. "Thank you again, Mr. Garrett, for the handkerchief and for, well, possibly saving my life." He studied her face, something unreadable in his expression. "Just doing what anyone would do, Mrs. Blackburn," but they both knew that wasn't true. In the moment of danger, he had been the only one to act. "Olivia," she said impulsively. "My name is Olivia." His smile deepened. "Olivia," he repeated as if testing the sound of it. "Be careful crossing these streets. Nebraska City's getting busier by the day." With that, he tipped his hat and continued on his way, leaving Olivia clutching his handkerchief and wondering why such a simple interaction had left her feeling more alive than she had in years. That evening, as she sat across from Harold at their dining table, Olivia found herself studying her husband with new eyes. His meticulously trimmed mustache, his expensive waistcoat, his perfectly manicured hands that had never known physical labor, all the trappings of success that had once seemed so impressive now struck her as artificial. "You're unusually quiet tonight," Harold remarked, not looking up from his plate. "Am I? I thought you preferred my silence." His fork paused midway to his mouth. "I prefer appropriate conversation. Your tendency toward melancholy is tiresome." "Perhaps, if I had something to occupy my mind beyond household ledgers and calling cards." "We've discussed this," Harold cut her off sharply. "Your duties as my wife are quite sufficient occupation. I won't have you involving yourself in matters beyond your understanding or station." Olivia set down her fork, appetite gone. "And what exactly is my station, Harold? Ornament? Hostess? What purpose do I serve in this house beyond decorating your arm at social functions?" Harold's face reddened. "You forget yourself," he said, voice dangerously low. "You are a shopkeeper's daughter with no prospects and considerable family debt. I gave you position, security, and respectability. Your ingratitude is appalling." Each word landed like a physical blow. The worst part was that he spoke the truth. She had entered this marriage with open eyes, knowing it was a transaction more than a union of hearts. Yet somewhere along the way, the reality of her situation had become unbearable. "I'm sorry," she said mechanically. "You're right, of course." Harold's expression softened slightly with her capitulation. "I have news," he said, returning to his meal. "The scout I hired for the western expansion is making excellent progress. I'll be sending additional funds and instructions with him next week." Olivia's heart quickened at the mention of Patrick Garrett. Will he be returning to Nebraska City afterward, eventually? The banking outposts need regular communication. Harold gave her a curious look. "Why do you ask?" "Mere curiosity," she replied carefully. "The West sounds so different from our orderly existence here." Harold scoffed. "It's a lawless wilderness requiring civilization and structure, precisely what my banking interests will help establish. Now, enough idle chatter. I have correspondence to attend to this evening." Later that night, Olivia stood at her bedroom window, gazing at the stars visible over the rooftops of Nebraska City. Somewhere to the west, under those same stars, Patrick Garrett was making camp along the trail. The thought of such freedom made her chest ache with longing. The handkerchief he'd given her was hidden in her sewing basket. She'd washed it, intending to return it should their paths cross again, but found herself reluctant to part with this small connection to someone who had looked at her as a person rather than a possession. "This is madness," she whispered to herself. A chance encounter, a moment of heroism, a kind smile, these were not foundations for the reckless thoughts taking root in her mind. Yet for the first time in 3 years, she found herself contemplating possibilities beyond the suffocating confines of her marriage. 5 days later, Olivia was arranging flowers in the parlor when Harold entered, his expression unusually animated. "The scout has returned with excellent news," he announced. "The location I selected near Fort Laramie is perfect for our first western branch. I'm sending him back with contracts and capital to secure the property." Olivia carefully positioned a rose in the arrangement. "That's wonderful," she said, working to keep her voice neutral. "When does he leave?" "Tomorrow morning. I've invited him to dine with us tonight, a gesture of goodwill for his service. See that Mrs. Peterson prepares something substantial. These frontiersmen have hearty appetites." Olivia nearly dropped the vase. "Tonight? Here? Is that a problem?" Harold's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "No, of course not." She busied herself with the flowers. "I'll speak with Mrs. Peterson immediately." "Good. And wear the burgundy dress, the one with the lace collar. It presents an image of refined domesticity appropriate for impressing upon our guest the civilization he's helping to extend westward." When Harold left, Olivia pressed a hand to her racing heart. Patrick Garrett was coming to her home, to her table. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. What if he mentioned their previous encounters? Harold would be furious at the familiar way they'd spoken. Worse, what if Patrick's presence confirmed the inappropriate feelings she'd been harboring? The hours before dinner passed in a flurry of activity. Olivia supervised Mrs. Peterson's preparation of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. She selected their finest china and arranged fresh-cut flowers. She spent extra time on her appearance, pinning her hair in a style that softened her features while remaining appropriately modest. As the grandfather clock in the hall struck 6, the doorbell rang. From her position at the top of the stairs, Olivia watched as their housekeeper admitted Patrick Garrett into the foyer. He'd made efforts to dress for the occasion in a clean shirt and jacket, but still looked refreshingly out of place among the ornate furnishings of the Blackburn home. Harold emerged from his study to greet him. "Mr. Garrett, welcome. I trust you found our home without difficulty." "Yes, sir." "Can't miss the biggest house in town." Patrick's eyes traveled up the staircase and met Olivia's. Something flickered in his gaze: recognition, warmth, and something more complicated that she couldn't name. Olivia descended the stairs with practiced grace. "Good evening, Mr. Garrett, Mrs. Blackburn." He bowed slightly. If he planned to mention their previous meetings, his expression gave no indication of it. "Shall we proceed to the dining room?" Harold gestured, oblivious to the undercurrent between his wife and the scout. Dinner began with Harold dominating the conversation, detailing his vision for a chain of banks connecting Nebraska City to the Western Territories. Patrick listened attentively, offering occasional insights about the settlements and conditions along the trail. "The land beyond Fort Laramie is still mostly uncharted," Patrick explained. "But pioneers are pushing further every season. Your timing is good. Establishing financial services now puts you ahead of the inevitable expansion." Harold nodded approvingly. "Precisely my thinking." "Tell me, what takes a man like yourself to the frontier? Surely there are safer professions." Patrick considered the question while cutting into his roast beef. "I was raised on a farm in Pennsylvania. After the war with Mexico, I found I couldn't settle back into that life. The open country calls to something in me." "You fought in Mexico?" Olivia asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Patrick nodded. "Yes, madam, saw action at Buena Vista." "How fascinating," she said, earning a sharp look from Harold. "Hardly appropriate dinner conversation, my dear," Harold chided. "I'm sure Mr. Garrett doesn't wish to revisit such unpleasant memories." "Actually," Patrick said, his eyes on Olivia, "I don't mind. Sometimes it's good to remember where you've been to appreciate where you are." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Olivia felt herself flush under his steady gaze and quickly took a sip of water. Harold cleared his throat. "Mr. Garrett, I've prepared documents and bank drafts for your return journey. Given the sensitive nature of this business, I'd like to review them with you in my study after dinner." "Of course. And you'll depart tomorrow?" Patrick nodded. "At first light, best to make good distance before the midday heat." "How long will your journey take?" Olivia asked, trying to keep her voice casual. 3 weeks to Fort Laramie if the weather holds and the river crossings are manageable." "And when might you return to Nebraska City?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Harold frowned at her unusual interest, but Patrick answered smoothly. "That depends on how quickly I can secure the property and establish initial operations. Perhaps a month, maybe 2. "Excellent," Harold said, reclaiming control of the conversation. "I expect regular reports via telegram when possible." After dinner, the men retired to Harold's study, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. She moved to the parlor and sat at the piano, not playing but running her fingers lightly over the keys. The evening had been both wonderful and torturous, having Patrick so near, yet being unable to speak freely with him. Nearly an hour passed before she heard the study door open. Harold's voice carried down the hall. "The arrangements are satisfactory, then?" "I'll expect your first report upon reaching Fort Kearney." "Yes, sir. And thank you for the dinner. It was the finest meal I've had in some time." "My wife does maintain an excellent household," Harold replied, the pride in his voice the same he might use when discussing a particularly valuable possession. Olivia rose as they entered the parlor. Harold's expression was self-satisfied, while Patrick's was carefully neutral. "Mr. Garrett will be leaving now," Harold announced. "He has preparations to complete before his departure." "Of course." Olivia extended her hand formally. "Safe travels, Mr. Garrett." When Patrick took her hand, she felt something pressed into her palm, a small folded paper. His fingers closed briefly around hers, conveying the need for secrecy. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Blackburn," he said, his eyes conveying far more than his words. After he left, Harold spent another hour detailing his Western banking strategy while Olivia pretended interest, the note burning in the pocket of her dress. It wasn't until she retired to her bedroom separate from Harold's by mutual, unspoken agreement that she was able to examine it. Written in a strong, clear hand were the words, "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., Miller's Crossing, 2 miles south of town. If you wish to talk." Olivia's hands trembled as she read the note again. The implication was clear. Patrick was offering her an opportunity to meet him away from watchful eyes. The propriety she'd been raised with warred with the desperate longing for connection that had been growing since their first encounter. Sleep eluded her that night as she wrestled with her conscience. To meet a man alone was scandalous enough. That the man was her husband's employee made it unthinkable. Yet the thought of letting Patrick ride away without speaking to him once more seemed equally impossible. By dawn, she had made her decision. After Harold left for the bank at his usual early hour, Olivia informed Mrs. Peterson that she was visiting a sick friend and would return by midday. She changed into her simplest dress and walking boots, then slipped out of the house. Miller's Crossing was where the Southern Trail crossed Weeping Water Creek. Olivia had visited the spot years earlier during her courtship with Harold, one of the few outings where he'd seemed almost romantic, pointing out the property he planned to develop along the creek's fertile banks. Her heart pounded as she approached the crossing, half expecting to find no one there, convincing herself the note had been a misunderstanding. Then she saw him, Patrick Garrett, sitting astride his horse, leading a pack mule laden with supplies. Relief and terror flooded her simultaneously. He dismounted as she approached, his expression a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You came," he said simply. "I shouldn't have," Olivia replied, stopping several feet away. "This is improper in every possible way." "I know." He stepped closer. "I debated all night whether to leave that note. If it's caused you distress, I apologize." "Why did you?" she asked. "Why risk your employment with Harold to meet me here?" Patrick's gaze was steady. "Because in the few moments we've spoken, I've seen something in your eyes that haunts me. Sadness. Longing. A spirit trapped in circumstances it wasn't meant for." His perception startled her. "You can't possibly know anything about my circumstances." "Perhaps not the details," he conceded, "but I recognize a cage when I see one, even a gilded one." Tears sprang unexpectedly to Olivia's eyes. "You have no right to make such judgments about my life." "You're right." His voice softened. "I overstepped. I couldn't ride away without offering you a chance to speak freely, away from your husband's watchful eye." The simple truth of his words disarmed her. How long had it been since anyone had offered her the opportunity to simply be herself? "My marriage was arranged to save my family from financial ruin," she found herself saying. "Harold paid my father's debts in exchange for my hand. I knew what I was agreeing to." Patrick didn't respond immediately, just listened with an intensity that encouraged her to continue. "I thought I could build a life of respect, if not love. I thought children would follow, giving me purpose." She looked away. 3 years later, I'm still waiting for both." "Does he mistreat you?" Patrick's voice held a dangerous edge. "No, not physically. Harold is correct in all things. He provides well, maintains appearances, never raises his voice or hand in anger." She gave a bitter laugh. "He simply doesn't see me as anything more than an accessory to his success to be displayed when useful and ignored when not." Patrick moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "No one should live as an ornament, Olivia. You deserve more than that." The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. "It doesn't matter what I deserve. I made vows." Vows meant to unite two people in love and partnership. From what you've described, your husband hasn't honored the spirit of those vows, even if he's maintained the letter. "What are you suggesting?" she whispered, though part of her already knew. "Come west with me," he said, the words hanging in the air between them. "I have land near Fort Laramie, good land with a small cabin. It's a hard life compared to what you're used to, but it's a free one." Olivia stepped back, shocked by the directness of his proposal. "You're asking me to abandon my marriage, my home, everything I know. We barely know each other." "I know that you're unhappy," he said gently. "I know that every time we've spoken, there's been something between us that can't be explained. I know that I've crossed half the country and back, met countless people along the way, but haven't been able to get you out of my thoughts since that first moment our eyes met." His honesty was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Even if what you say is true, what you're proposing is impossible. Harold would never grant me a divorce. He'd track us down, have you arrested for theft of his property, me. Not if we disappeared into the Western Territories. The land beyond the forts is vast and largely ungoverned. People seeking fresh starts go there every day." "And what would I be to you?" she challenged. "Your frontier wife, your companion, the woman you stole from another man." Patrick took her hands in his. "Whatever you choose to be, Olivia. I'm offering you freedom, not another cage." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. For a wild moment, she imagined it riding west with this man, building a new life far from Harold's controlling presence, perhaps even finding love along the way. "I can't," she finally said, withdrawing her hands. "As tempting as your offer is, I can't simply run away from my responsibilities. I made promises, however misguided they may have been." Disappointment flickered across Patrick's face, but he nodded. "I understand." "I had to offer, though I knew it was unlikely you'd accept." "When do you return?" she asked, hating how much the answer mattered to her. "If all goes well, 6 to 8 weeks." He studied her face. "Will you be here?" The question carried weight beyond its simple meaning. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Patrick reached into his saddlebag and removed a small leather-bound book. "Take this," he said, offering it to her. "It's a journal of my travels west. It might help you understand why I love that country so much." Olivia accepted the book, their fingers brushing. "I should return it before you leave." "Keep it," he insisted. "Consider it a gift, no obligations attached." She clutched the journal to her chest. "Thank you for this and for seeing me, really seeing me. Goodbye, Olivia Blackburn." He mounted his horse with the easy grace she'd first noticed days ago. "Whatever you decide about your life, I hope you find happiness in it." With that, he tipped his hat and urged his horse forward, crossing the creek and continuing south. Olivia watched until he disappeared from sight, the journal in her hands and his impossible offer echoing in her mind. The weeks following Patrick's departure were among the most conflicted of Olivia's life. By day, she maintained her role as Harold Blackburn's dutiful wife, overseeing household matters and accompanying him to social functions where she smiled and nodded at all the right moments. But in the privacy of night, she read Patrick's journal by candlelight, losing herself in his vivid descriptions of the Western Territories. His writing was straightforward but evocative tales of towering mountains with snow-capped peaks, endless prairies where wildflowers bloomed in dazzling colors, crystal-clear streams teeming with fish. He wrote of encounters with native tribes, some hostile but many willing to trade and share knowledge of the land. Most compelling were his accounts of the settlements springing up along the trail's communities, where people were valued for their contributions rather than their social standing. Every page fueled Olivia's growing dissatisfaction with her confined existence. She began taking longer walks through Nebraska City, observing the bustling activity along the riverfront, where pioneers outfitted their wagons for the journey west. She studied their faces, the anticipation, the determination, the hope for better lives ahead, and wondered if she might ever summon similar courage. Harold noticed her restlessness, but attributed it to spring fever. "Perhaps we should host a garden party next month," he suggested one evening. "Give you something to occupy your time with planning." "Whatever you think best," she replied automatically, her mind still lingering on Patrick's description of a sunset over the Laramie Plains. "I've received word from Garrett," Harold continued, drawing her immediate attention. "He's secured the property near Fort Laramie and begun construction of the bank building. His initiative is commendable." "When does he return?" Olivia asked, striving for casual interest. "That's the thing," Harold frowned. "He's requesting permission to remain in the territory through summer to oversee construction and establish operations. Says it would be more efficient than returning only to make the journey again." Relief and disappointment warred within Olivia. Part of her had been counting days until Patrick's expected return, while another part dreaded facing him again, knowing the impossible choice he'd presented. "You trust him with such responsibility?" she asked. "Ordinarily, no. But his reports are thorough, and my contacts in the area confirm his activities align with my interests." Harold sipped his brandy. "I've decided to grant his request. The sooner that bank is operational, the sooner we begin generating returns on our investment." Olivia nodded, fighting to maintain her composure. Patrick wouldn't be returning for months, perhaps not until autumn. The realization left her feeling strangely bereft. The following weeks brought increasing tensions in Nebraska City. News of conflicts between settlers and native tribes in the Western Territories dominated conversations. Harold's banking associates spoke ominously of potential disruptions to trade routes and investments. "The Army must take decisive action," Harold declared during a dinner with the mayor and other prominent citizens. "These savages must learn that progress cannot be impeded." "What of negotiation?" Olivia asked before she could stop herself. Mr. Garrett's journal mentions tribes willing to coexist peacefully with settlers." The table fell silent. Harold stared at her with narrow eyes. "What journal?" Olivia realized her mistake too late. "A book about Western exploration I borrowed from the lending library," she improvised. "The author suggested some tribes were amenable to treaties." "Romantic nonsense," Harold dismissed. "The only language these people understand is force." Now about the railroad investments. Later that evening, Harold confronted her in the privacy of their home. "Since when do you read accounts of Western exploration? And when did you begin calling my scout by his Christian name?" "I misspoke," Olivia said, heart racing. "And is it so surprising that I might take interest in the regions where your business is expanding?" Harold studied her with suspicious eyes. "You've been different since Garrett dined with us. Distracted, questioning. I don't care for it." "I'm simply trying to be a more engaged partner in your endeavors," she countered, invoking his frequent criticism of her disinterest. "Your engagement should be directed toward appropriate womanly concerns." He moved closer, his voice hardening. "I indulge your reading and walking liberties, Olivia, but don't mistake my tolerance for permission to forget your place." The threat underlying his words was clear. Olivia lowered her eyes in practiced submission. "Of course. I apologize for overstepping." Harold seemed satisfied with her capitulation, but Olivia sensed he would be watching her more closely. She would need to be more careful with Patrick's journal and with her increasingly independent thoughts. June brought sweltering heat to Nebraska City and news that shattered Olivia's fragile equilibrium. Harold returned from the bank one afternoon, his expression grave. "There's been an attack on a settlement near Fort Laramie," he announced. Several killed, including 2 of my representatives." Olivia's blood ran cold. "And Mr. Garrett?" she asked, unable to disguise her concern. No word. He was traveling between outposts when the attack occurred. Harold poured himself a larger brandy than usual. "This is a significant setback to our expansion plans." Relief that Patrick wasn't confirmed dead mingled with fear for his safety. "Will you send someone to investigate? I've already dispatched telegrams to military contacts in the region." Harold downed his drink. "If Garrett is alive, he'll report in. If not, I'll need to appoint a replacement." The casual way he discussed Patrick's possible death made Olivia's stomach turn. That night, she prayed for the first time in years, begging whatever higher power might listen to keep Patrick Garrett safe. 2 agonizing weeks passed without news. Harold grew increasingly irritable as reports of further unrest reached Nebraska City. Investors withdrew from Western ventures and the bank's stock began to falter. Then, on a stormy July evening, a telegram arrived. Harold read it silently, his expression shifting from tension to relief. "Garrett is alive," he announced. "He was escorted to Fort Laramie by friendly Shoshone after being wounded in the attack." "Is he badly hurt?" Olivia asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The telegram doesn't specify." "But he's well enough to have salvaged our property documents and banking contracts." Harold seemed more concerned with business matters than Patrick's condition. "He'll remain at the fort to recover, then resume operations once the army has secured the region." That night, Olivia lay awake listening to the thunder, imagining Patrick wounded but alive, hundreds of miles away. The knowledge that he had survived intensified rather than quelled her emotional turmoil. In the weeks of uncertainty, she had been forced to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. Her feelings for Patrick Garrett went far beyond admiration or fleeting attraction. She had fallen in love with him. The realization brought no joy, only a sharper awareness of her impossible situation. Harold would never release her from their marriage, particularly not to a man he employed. Even if she fled west as Patrick had suggested, the scandal would destroy her reputation and potentially endanger both of them. Summer faded into early autumn. Olivia moved through her days like a sleepwalker, performing her duties with mechanical precision while her inner life grew increasingly separate from her outward existence. She hid Patrick's journal beneath a loose floorboard in her dressing room, returning to it whenever she could safely do so, finding both comfort and torment in his words. In late September, unexpected news arrived with Harold's return from the bank. "Garrett is returning to Nebraska City," he announced. "The situation in the territories has stabilized enough for construction to resume on our banking facilities." Olivia's heart leapt, though she kept her expression neutral. "When does he arrive?" "Within the week. I've arranged for him to stay at the Riverview Hotel rather than making the journey back west immediately. Winter comes early to the mountains, and I need detailed reports before deciding our next steps." The knowledge that Patrick would be in Nebraska City, so close, yet still unreachable, filled Olivia with equal parts anticipation and dread. What would she say to him if they met? How could she face him knowing what she now understood about her feelings? 5 days later, Harold announced that Patrick had arrived in town and would be meeting with him the following day. "We'll host him for dinner tomorrow evening," he told Olivia. "See that the menu includes beef. He specifically requested it after months of trail rations." The casual mention of Patrick's preferences sent a flutter through Olivia's chest. She spent the next day in careful preparation, selecting her most becoming dress, a deep green that matched her eyes, and paying extra attention to her appearance. When Patrick arrived for dinner, the changes in him were immediately apparent. A new scar ran along his jawline, and he carried himself with a slight stiffness that suggested his wounds hadn't fully healed. Yet his eyes, those expressive hazel eyes, lit up when they found Olivia's across the entryway. "Mr. Garrett, welcome back," Harold greeted him. "We were concerned when news of the attacks reached us." "It was a close call," Patrick acknowledged, his voice carrying the same warmth Olivia remembered. "But the Shoshone who found me knew enough English to understand I wasn't their enemy." "Fortunate indeed," Harold replied. "Olivia, take Mr. Garrett's coat while I pour drinks." As she accepted his jacket, their fingers brushed momentarily. The brief contact sent electricity through her body, and she saw from his quick intake of breath that he felt it too. Dinner progressed with Harold dominating conversation, questioning Patrick about the western outposts and potential for expansion. Olivia contributed little, afraid her voice might betray her emotions, but she couldn't keep her eyes from returning to Patrick throughout the meal. "I must say, Garrett, your dedication to establishing our interests in the territory is commendable," Harold said as they finished dessert. "Few men would have persevered through such dangers." "The West offers opportunities worth fighting for," Patrick replied, his gaze briefly meeting Olivia's. "Freedom to build something meaningful, to become who you're meant to be rather than who circumstances have shaped you to be." The philosophical turn surprised Harold. "Quite profound for a scout," he remarked with faint condescension. "Now, shall we discuss the financial particulars in my study?" As the men rose, Patrick turned to Olivia. "Thank you for the excellent meal, Mrs. Blackburn. I've thought often of your hospitality during my months on the trail." "You're most welcome, Mr. Garrett," she replied, certain he could hear the unspoken meaning beneath her formal words. When the men disappeared into Harold's study, Olivia retreated to the parlor, attempting to calm her racing thoughts with needlework. An hour passed before she heard the study door open and voices in the hallway. "I'll expect your written report tomorrow," Harold was saying. "Then we can finalize arrangements for your return journey." "Yes, sir, though if I might suggest, waiting until spring would be wiser. The mountain passes become treacherous by November." We'll discuss options tomorrow. Good evening, Garrett." Olivia rose as Harold entered the parlor alone. "Has Mr. Garrett left?" she asked, unable to hide her disappointment. "Yes, we'll continue our business tomorrow." Harold poured himself a brandy. "He's changed somewhat, more forthright in his opinions than I recall." "Perhaps his experiences have given him new perspective," Olivia suggested carefully. Harold gave her a measuring look. "Perhaps, though I prefer employees who remember their place. Speaking of which, he asked after you quite particularly." Olivia froze. "Did he?" "Yes." "Inquired if you'd been well during his absence." Harold swirled his brandy. "I found it presumptuous." "Simple courtesy, I'm sure," Olivia said, focusing intently on her needlework to hide her flushed cheeks. Well, I informed him that my wife's welfare is my concern alone." Harold finished his drink. "I have correspondence to complete before bed." After he left, Olivia abandoned any pretense of sewing and moved to the window, gazing at the starlit street below. Patrick was somewhere in Nebraska City tonight, so close, yet impossibly distant. The thought of him leaving again, perhaps never to return, created a physical ache in her chest. The following morning brought unexpected developments. Harold announced at breakfast that urgent business required his presence in Omaha. "The Territorial Banking Commission has called an emergency meeting regarding the Western unrest," he explained, irritation evident in his voice. "I'll be gone 3 days, perhaps 4. Olivia's heart raced at the implications. "Should I accompany you?" she asked, already knowing his answer. "Certainly not. These are serious financial matters, not social events." He checked his pocket watch. My train departs at noon. I've instructed Garrett to continue his reports in my absence. He'll deliver them to my office, not here. I've made that explicitly clear. The unnecessary emphasis on the last point suggested Harold wasn't entirely blind to the undercurrents between his wife and his scout. Olivia nodded dutifully. Safe journey, then. After seeing Harold off at the train station, Olivia returned home, her mind swirling with possibilities and prohibitions. The house felt different knowing he wouldn't return for days, less oppressive somehow, as if the very walls relaxed in his absence. That evening, as dusk fell over Nebraska City, a soft knock at the back door startled Olivia from her reading. Mrs. Peterson had retired for the night, leaving her alone in the house. Cautiously, she approached the door, lamp in hand. "Who's there?" she called. "Patrick Garrett," came the reply, his voice low but clear. Olivia's hand trembled on the latch. Opening this door crossed a boundary that couldn't be uncrossed. Yet she found herself turning the key, pulling the door open to reveal Patrick standing in the shadows of the garden. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, even as she stepped back to allow him entry. "I know." He moved inside, keeping a respectful distance despite the intensity in his eyes. "But I couldn't leave again without speaking to you alone." In the lamplight, she could see the scar along his jaw more clearly, a reminder of how close she had come to losing him before ever truly knowing him. "Harold made it clear you were to deliver your reports to his office." "I already did. This isn't about business." Patrick's gaze held her steadily. "Did you read the journal?" "Yes," she admitted. "Many times." "Then you know why I love the West, the freedom it offers, the chance to define yourself by your actions rather than your circumstances." "It sounds wonderful," Olivia said softly, "like a dream. It doesn't have to be just a dream." Patrick took a step closer. "My offer stands, Olivia. Come west with me." The directness of his proposal sent a shock through her system. "Patrick, before you answer, there's something you should know." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "Your husband's expansion isn't what it seems." Confusion furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" "The banks he's establishing aren't just for legitimate business. They're being used to launder money from land schemes that are cheating both settlers and native tribes." Patrick offered her the paper. "This is a copy of an agreement I found in his files at Fort Laramie. It details arrangements to falsify land titles and defraud investors." Olivia stared at the document, recognizing Harold's signature beside those of men she knew were under investigation for corruption. "I don't understand." "Harold is many things, but I never thought him dishonest. The evidence suggests otherwise. These operations have caused suffering for hundreds of families and provoked violence that's been blamed on tribal hostilities." Patrick's voice was gentle but firm. "I couldn't in good conscience continue aiding his expansion knowing what I know now." The revelation shook Olivia's worldview. She had accepted her husband's coldness, his controlling nature, his disregard for her as a person, but outright criminality. That altered the moral equation entirely. "What will you do with this information?" she asked. "That depends partly on you," Patrick replied. "I'm leaving Nebraska City within the week, heading west for the last time before winter. I won't be returning to Harold's employment." The implication hung in the air between them. "And if I were to leave with you?" Olivia asked, her voice barely audible. "Then we travel light and fast, beyond his reach." Patrick moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I have enough saved to establish us on my land near Fort Laramie." "It wouldn't be the life of luxury you're accustomed to." "This isn't luxury," Olivia interrupted, gesturing to the elegant furnishings around them. "It's a beautiful prison. I've never belonged here." Patrick's expression softened. "Where do you belong, Olivia?" The question pierced straight to her heart. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. All the doubts, the fears, the social constraints that had held her back seemed to fall away, leaving only the truth. "With you," she whispered. "I belong with you." The confession hung between them, irrevocable and transformative. Patrick reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and cupped her cheek in his calloused hand. "I've thought of nothing but you since the day we met," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I tried to convince myself it was madness that a woman like you could never consider a life with someone like me." "A woman like me?" Olivia smiled sadly. "A banker's ornament with no useful skills for frontier life, a courageous, intelligent woman trapped in circumstances not of her choosing." His thumb gently traced her cheekbone. "Someone with fire in her eyes whenever she speaks of freedom." The tenderness in his touch and words broke something loose inside Olivia, a dam holding back years of loneliness and longing. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she leaned into his hand. "If I go with you, there's no coming back," she said. "Harold would never grant a divorce. We'd be living in sin by society's standards." "Perhaps by Nebraska City standards," Patrick agreed, "but the territories have different measures of virtue. Out there, people are judged by their actions, their integrity, their treatment of others, not by papers filed in Eastern courthouses." His words resonated with everything she'd come to believe through reading his journal, and through her own growing disillusionment with the superficial propriety of her current life. "When would we leave?" she asked, the question itself a decision made. Relief and joy transformed Patrick's face. 3 days from now. Harold won't return from Omaha until the day after. We'll have a head start." "He'll come after us," Olivia warned. "His pride would demand it, even if his heart doesn't. Not if he's facing legal troubles of his own." Patrick indicated the document she still held. "I have more evidence that I plan to leave with the territorial marshal before we depart. Harold will be too occupied defending himself to pursue us." The plan was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What should I bring?" "Only what you can carry in one trunk. Practical clothing, any small valuables that are truly yours, and whatever can't be replaced." His eyes grew serious. "This journey won't be easy, Olivia. The trail is hard, and starting over in the territories will test us both." "I'm stronger than I appear," she replied with newfound certainty. "Years of navigating Harold's moods and society's expectations have taught me resilience, if nothing else." Patrick's smile warmed her from within. "I believe you are." He hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing you should know before you decide." "What is it?" she asked, suddenly anxious. "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you since that moment at Jensen's store when you looked at me like I was a person worth seeing. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, that truth remains." The declaration, so honest, so different from Harold's calculated courtship years ago, overwhelmed Olivia. Without thinking, she closed the distance between them, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. Patrick responded with gentle restraint at first, then with growing passion as she wrapped her arms around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Olivia felt as though she'd awakened from a long, dreamless sleep. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "Enough to risk everything." Patrick pressed his forehead to hers. 3 days, he murmured. "Meet me at Miller's Crossing at dawn. I'll have horses and supplies ready." "I'll be there," she promised. After he slipped away into the night, Olivia stood in the quiet house, her heart pounding with equal measures of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, every sense heightened, every emotion vibrant and real. The following days passed in careful preparation. Olivia sorted through her possessions, selecting only what held true value: her mother's locket, A few practical dresses that could be altered for frontier life. The small inheritance of jewelry that had been her grandmother's. She sewed a hidden pocket into a plain traveling skirt, where she concealed the money she'd saved from household allowances over the years. On the evening before their planned departure, she wrote a letter to Harold, not seeking to justify her actions, but to make clear that her decision was final. She explained that she had discovered his fraudulent business dealings and could no longer participate in a marriage built on deceit, both personal and professional. "I release you from any obligation to me," she wrote, "and expect the same courtesy in return. The life we've shared has brought neither of us happiness, only the hollow appearance of success. I wish you well, but I cannot continue living as your possession rather than your partner." She sealed the letter and placed it on Harold's desk, where he would find it upon his return from Omaha. That night, Olivia barely slept, her mind cycling between doubt and determination. Was she truly prepared for the hardships of frontier life? Could love for a man she'd known only briefly sustain her through the challenges ahead? By first light, these questions still lingered, but her resolve remained unshaken. She dressed in her plainest traveling clothes, secured her hair beneath a modest bonnet, and carried her small trunk downstairs before Mrs. Peterson would rise to prepare breakfast. Leaving the key to the house on the kitchen table, Olivia slipped out the back door and made her way through the pre-dawn streets of Nebraska City for the last time. Miller's Crossing was shrouded in early morning mist when she arrived, the creek gurgling peacefully beneath the small wooden bridge. For a heart-stopping moment, she feared Patrick might not come, that he had reconsidered the risks or been prevented from meeting her. Then she heard the soft approach of hooves on the packed earth of the trail. Patrick appeared through the mist, leading 2 saddled horses and a pack mule. The smile that broke across his face when he saw her waiting washed away any lingering doubts. "You came," he said, dismounting quickly to help with her trunk. "Did you doubt I would?" Olivia asked, suddenly shy despite everything they'd shared. "Not your courage," he replied, securing her belongings to the pack mule. "But I would have understood if the practical realities had given you second thoughts. My only reality that matters now is this one," she said, reaching for his hand. "A chance at true freedom, with someone who sees me as I am." Patrick lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "The journey ahead won't be easy," he warned again. 3 weeks of hard riding, sleeping under the stars, facing whatever weather and challenges the trail presents. "I'm ready," Olivia said with newfound confidence. "More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." He helped her mount the sturdy mare he'd brought for her, a gentle but strong animal well suited to the journey ahead. As dawn broke over the eastern horizon, they urged their horses forward, crossing the creek that had marked the boundary of Olivia's former life. "Where exactly are we headed?" she asked as Nebraska City disappeared behind them. "West along the Platte River Trail, then north to Fort Laramie," Patrick explained. "From there, we'll follow the Laramie River to a valley where I've staked my claim. It's beautiful country, Olivia, pine forests, clear streams, meadows that bloom with wildflowers in spring." "It sounds like paradise," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Patrick smiled, the rising sun highlighting the plains of his face. "Not paradise, just home. Our home if you'll help me build it." As they rode west into the growing light, Olivia felt the weight of her former life falling away with each mile. Ahead lay uncertainty, hardship, and challenges she could scarcely imagine, but also freedom, purpose, and love freely given and received. The story of Olivia Blackburn, trapped in a loveless marriage, was ending. The story of Olivia and Patrick Garrett, forging a new life in the Western Territories, was just beginning. Their journey west proved every bit as challenging as Patrick had warned. Days of hard riding left Olivia with aching muscles she hadn't known existed. Summer storms drenched them to the skin despite oilcloth ponchos. River crossings tested both their courage and their horses' strength. Yet Olivia faced each difficulty with growing confidence, discovering reserves of determination she had never needed in her sheltered existence. Patrick watched her transformation with admiration, offering guidance without condescension. He taught her to build a campfire, to recognize edible plants along the trail, to load and fire the small pistol he insisted she carry for protection. In return, she shared her knowledge of first aid, mending their clothing with neat stitches after days of rough travel, and keeping meticulous records of their supplies. At night, beside their campfire, they spoke of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Olivia learned of Patrick's childhood on a struggling Pennsylvania farm, his years in the army, and the wanderlust that had driven him west after the war. Patrick discovered Olivia's passion for books, her talent for sketching, and her quiet strength that had sustained her through years of emotional isolation. Their physical relationship developed gradually, with Patrick never pressuring despite the unconventional nature of their situation. When Olivia finally invited him to share her blankets beneath the vast starry sky, their union felt like a natural culmination of the bond growing between them, tender, passionate, and free from the constraints of her former marriage. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered afterward, cradled against his chest, "that two people could truly become one." Patrick stroked her hair, his expression solemn in the firelight. "That's what marriage should be, Olivia. Equal partnership, mutual respect, joy in each other's company. All the things you deserved but never received." "I have them now," she said, pressing a kiss to his scarred jawline. "That's what matters." As they traveled further west, signs of civilization grew scarcer. Settlements became smaller and farther apart. The landscape changed dramatically, rolling plains giving way to rugged buttes and distant mountains. Olivia filled page after page of her journal with descriptions and sketches, capturing the wonder of this new world. They reached Fort Laramie in early October, their arrival coinciding with the first hints of autumn color in the cottonwoods along the Laramie River. The fort bustled with activity: soldiers, traders, emigrants, and native people conducting business within its walls. "We should be married here," Patrick suggested as they approached the gates. "The fort has a chaplain who won't ask too many questions. It won't be legally recognized in Nebraska territory, but it will give us standing in these parts." Olivia's heart swelled at the suggestion. "Yes," she agreed without hesitation. "I want to be your wife in truth, not just in heart." The chaplain, a weathered man who had seen much of life's complexities on the frontier, performed a simple ceremony the following day. Olivia wore her plainest dress, freshly washed in the fort's laundry, with wildflowers gathered by a soldier's wife forming a makeshift bouquet. Patrick had traded for a new shirt and trimmed his beard for the occasion. "I take you, Olivia, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To honor and cherish through all the seasons of our lives together, to build a home and future founded on love and respect until death parts us." Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she repeated similar words. The simple gold band Patrick had somehow procured sliding onto her finger a perfect fit, as if meant to be there all along. "May your union be blessed with happiness and prosperity," the chaplain pronounced. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." They spent 2 days at the fort, gathering final supplies for the journey to Patrick's homestead. Olivia reveled in introducing herself as Mrs. Garrett, each utterance of her new name a declaration of freedom and choice. On the third morning, they departed northward, following the Laramie River through increasingly rugged country. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, aspen groves blazing gold against the dark green of pine forests. How much further? Olivia asked on their second day from the fort, excitement building as they rode through a particularly beautiful stretch of valley. Just beyond that ridge, Patrick replied, pointing to a rise ahead. There's a meadow with a year-round spring, bordered by forest for building material and shelter from winter winds. The perfect place to put down roots. When they crested the ridge an hour later, Olivia gasped at the vista spread before them. A broad meadow carpeted with autumn grasses sloped gently toward a clear stream. Stands of pine and aspen created natural boundaries, and in the distance, snow-capped peaks pierced the azure sky. "Oh, Patrick," she breathed, "it's even more beautiful than I imagined." "Welcome home, Olivia Garrett," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They urged their horses down the slope, stopping beside a crude cabin structure Patrick had begun during his previous visits. Little more than 4 walls and a roof, it offered basic shelter but would need significant work before winter set in. "It's not much," he apologized as they dismounted. "Nothing like what you're accustomed to." Olivia moved to his side, taking his hand in hers. "It's perfect," she said firmly. "Because we'll build it together, make it ours in a way my former house never was." Over the following weeks, they worked from dawn until dusk to prepare for the approaching winter. Patrick hunted deer and elk, teaching Olivia to preserve the meat through smoking and drying. She organized their supplies, planted hardy winter greens in a small garden plot, and learned to identify useful plants in the surrounding forest. Together, they improved the cabin, adding a proper stone fireplace, chinkling the log walls against drafts, constructing a small lean-to for the horses. Their evenings were spent planning additions for spring: a larger garden, perhaps a cow for milk, better furniture to replace the crude benches and bed frame Patrick had fashioned. As the first snows dusted the meadow in mid-November, Olivia stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching Patrick split firewood with powerful practiced strokes. Contentment filled her heart, a feeling so foreign yet so right that it sometimes overwhelmed her. "Are you cold?" Patrick asked, noticing her watching from the doorway. "No," she smiled. "Just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. 6 months ago, I was arranging flowers in a parlor and dreading another silent dinner across from a man who saw me as property. Now I'm helping build a true home with someone who loves me for myself." Patrick set down the axe and moved to join her, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they surveyed their homestead. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "Not one," she replied without hesitation. "This life demands more of me, challenges me daily, but every challenge met makes me stronger. Every day brings new learning, new growth." "You've amazed me," he confessed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Most women raised in comfort would have broken under the hardships we've faced." "I was already breaking in that comfortable cage," Olivia said. "Here, I'm becoming whole." The winter months tested their resilience and deepened their bond. Heavy snows sometimes confined them to the cabin for days, but they found joy in simple pleasures, reading aloud from the few books they possessed, teaching each other songs from their childhoods, sharing their bodies with increasing passion and intimacy. By February, Olivia suspected what the occasional morning sickness and missed monthly courses confirmed: she was carrying Patrick's child. When she shared the news one evening as they sat before the fire, his expression of wonder and joy brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat abdomen. "Our child." "Are you pleased?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know we hadn't planned, please doesn't begin to describe it," Patrick interrupted, gathering her into his arms, overjoyed, terrified, grateful beyond words. He pulled back to look into her eyes. "Are you happy, truly?" "More than I ever thought possible," Olivia assured him. "Though I'm a bit frightened too. We're so far from doctors, from help. Women have been having babies on the frontier since the first settlers arrived," Patrick reminded her, though his own concern was evident. "When spring comes, we'll visit the Shoshone village to the north. They have midwives with knowledge passed through generations." The prospect both reassured and intimidated Olivia, but she trusted Patrick's judgment. The Shoshone had saved his life after the attack. He spoke of them with deep respect and had already established peaceful trading relations with their nearest band. Spring arrived with explosive beauty meadow flowers carpeting the ground almost overnight as the snow retreated, creeks swollen with snowmelt, birds returning to nest in the surrounding trees. Olivia's body changed along with the landscape, her belly rounding visibly as the child within grew stronger. True to his word, Patrick took her to visit the Shoshone settlement when the trails became passable. The village of Hyde Tippies, nestled in a protected valley, received them with cautious hospitality. Patrick's fluency in their basic phrases and the small gifts he brought, coffee, sugar, metal tools, eased initial tensions. The tribal midwife, a woman whose deeply lined face spoke of decades of experience, examined Olivia with gentle, knowing hands. Through Patrick's translation, she pronounced both mother and child healthy, predicting a birth near the harvest moon in early autumn. "She says you have strong hips and a good heart," Patrick relayed, his expression tender. "The journey will be difficult, as all births are, but she sees no reason to fear." Olivia found unexpected comfort in the older woman's calm confidence. Before they departed, the midwife pressed a small pouch of herbs into her hands, demonstrating through gestures how to prepare them as tea to ease the discomforts of pregnancy. Summer passed in a blur of activity as they expanded their homestead. Patrick built an addition to the cabin that would serve as a nursery, constructed better furniture from seasoned wood, and enlarged their garden. Olivia preserved the garden's bounty, sewed baby clothes from fabric they'd traded for, and continued keeping detailed records of their progress. They also received their first visitors, a family heading further west, who had heard at Fort Laramie of the Garrett's homestead. More travelers followed as word spread of the welcoming couple offering fresh vegetables and occasional hot meals in exchange for news and small goods that couldn't be produced locally. "We could establish a proper way station," Patrick suggested one evening as they watched the sunset from a bench he'd built outside their cabin. "Offer lodging, supplies, information about the trails ahead. There's enough traffic now to support such an enterprise." "I'd like that," Olivia agreed, her hand resting on her prominent belly. "Our child should know other people, not grow up in isolation." As autumn approached, they prepared for two momentous events: the harvest and the baby's arrival. The garden yielded abundantly. The root cellar Patrick had dug beneath the cabin filled with potatoes, carrots, turnips, and preserves. Game was plentiful as animals fattened for winter, providing meat to be smoked and stored. The Shoshone midwife arrived a week before Olivia's time, having remembered her promise to assist with the birth. She moved into their home with quiet efficiency, teaching Olivia breathing techniques and preparing herbal remedies for the coming ordeal. Labor began on a clear September morning, the meadow frosted with the first light touch of autumn. For 18 hours, Olivia worked to bring their child into the world, drawing strength from Patrick's unwavering presence and the midwife's experienced guidance. Just as the harvest moon rose above the eastern ridge, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Exhausted but triumphant, Olivia cradled the red-faced infant to her breast while Patrick looked on in awe, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "He's perfect," Patrick whispered, gently touching the downy head, "strong like his mother." "What shall we name him?" Olivia asked, her voice hoarse from exertion. Patrick considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "William," he finally said, "after my father. He was a good man who taught me to stand by my principles, no matter the cost." "William Garrett," Olivia tested the name, smiling as the infant's tiny hand wrapped around her finger. "A good name for a free man." The midwife remained for 3 days, ensuring mother and child were thriving before returning to her people with gifts and heartfelt gratitude. Olivia adapted to motherhood with the same determination she'd shown in adjusting to frontier life, finding deep fulfillment in nurturing their son. As winter settled over the homestead once more, the Garrett family established new rhythms centered around William's needs and growth. Evenings found them gathered before the fireplace, Patrick whittling toys for the baby, Olivia nursing their son while reading aloud or planning improvements for the coming year. "I received a letter from Fort Laramie when I collected our supplies last week," Patrick mentioned one snowy December evening. "News from Nebraska City." Olivia looked up from the sleeping infant in her arms. "What sort of news?" "Harold Blackburn was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 5 years in prison," he said carefully, watching her reaction. "The evidence we left with the marshal proved decisive in the case against him and his associates." A complex mixture of emotions crossed Olivia's face: vindication, relief, and a hint of sadness for what might have been had Harold been a different sort of man. "Justice, then," she finally said. "For those he cheated, if not for the years he kept me captive in all but name." Patrick moved to sit beside her on the bed they shared, his arm encircling her shoulders. "Do you ever regret leaving? The comforts you sacrificed, the security of that life?" Olivia leaned into his embrace, gazing down at their son's peaceful face. "Not for a moment," she answered truthfully. "What good is comfort without love? What value has security without freedom? Here I have purpose, partnership, passion, everything that makes life worth living." Patrick pressed a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes I wake in the night and watch you sleeping beside me, hardly believing you're real, that you chose this life, chose me." "Best choice I ever made," Olivia murmured, lifting her face for a proper kiss. "From cage to castle." Patrick's brow furrowed in confusion. "Castle? Our humble cabin hardly qualifies." Olivia laughed softly, mindful of the sleeping baby. "The ancient Greeks believed a man's home was his castle, not because of grandeur, but because within its walls he was sovereign. This place, this life we're building, it's our kingdom, ruled by love and mutual respect. I wouldn't trade it for all the mansions in Nebraska City." Outside, snow fell softly in the moonlight, blanketing the meadow in pristine white. Inside the sturdy cabin, the fire crackled warmly as the Garrett family, Patrick, Olivia, and baby William, remained wrapped in each other's embrace, their love a fortress against whatever challenges the frontier might bring. Spring returned to the valley, bringing with it William's first steps and first words. The way station Patrick had envisioned became reality as they expanded the homestead to include a separate building where travelers could find rest, supplies, and information. Olivia's meticulous record-keeping and natural hospitality complemented Patrick's practical knowledge of the surrounding territory, making their outpost increasingly popular with pioneers heading further west. By the time William celebrated his second birthday, The Garrett homestead had grown into a small but thriving community hub. A blacksmith from Ohio had settled nearby, offering essential services to travelers and residents alike. A doctor and his wife had established a small practice after stopping at the way station and recognizing the need for medical care in the growing region. As Olivia watched her son playing in the autumn sunshine outside their now expanded home, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The woman who had once arranged flowers in a Nebraska City parlor, trapped in a marriage without love or respect, seemed like a character from a book she'd read long ago, familiar but distant. "Penny for your thoughts," Patrick said, joining her on the porch, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. Olivia leaned into his embrace, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen where their second child was growing. "Just thinking about how far we've come. How different life might have been if you hadn't offered me escape when I needed it most." Patrick's eyes followed William's energetic exploration of the yard. "I think about that sometimes too," he admitted. "How close we came to missing this life together." "Thank goodness for your courage," Olivia said, turning to face him fully. "For seeing something in me worth fighting for, even when I wasn't sure I could fight for myself." "It wasn't courage," Patrick corrected gently. "It was love. From that first moment in Jensen's store, something in your eyes called to my soul. I knew then that whatever happened, my heart would never be whole without you." Olivia rose on tiptoes to press her lips to his, still marveling at the freedom to express her love whenever and however she wished. "And now?" she asked against his mouth. Patrick's arms tightened around her, his hands splaying protectively over her growing belly. "Now," he murmured, "I have everything a man could ever want or need. A true partnership, children born of love, work that matters, and a home built by our own hands." William toddled toward them, a wildflower clutched in his chubby fist. "Mama, Papa, Wower." Olivia knelt to accept the gift, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "It's beautiful, sweetheart, thank you." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the valley in golden light, the Garrett family gathered on their porch, Patrick with his arm around Olivia, William perched on his father's knee, and a new life growing within Olivia's womb. Behind them stood the home they had built together, around them the community taking root in fertile soil, and before them stretched a future limited only by their dreams and determination. "I love you, Patrick Garrett," Olivia whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for helping me find my way home." "I love you too, Olivia Garrett," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for having the courage to build this life with me." In the distance, travelers approached along the trail, more wanderers seeking rest, supplies, and perhaps inspiration from the couple whose love story had become something of a legend in the territories. Olivia and Patrick rose together to welcome them, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating as one, two people who had found in each other not just love, but the freedom to become their truest selves.